Palace standing in the center of the city was shrouded in fog. Leaning on his hands, the main character screamed, not understanding what was happening to his body. With a dumbfounded look, he wondered why he had only released his astral form, noting that his physical body had stopped obeying him. Putting her hand to her chin, Veronica said that Theodore looked unwell, asking if he was exhausted so quickly. The main character said that he had enough mana and physical training, noting that for some reason now he was literally falling off his feet. Smirking, Veronica stated that if he really trained his body in magic, but still felt tired, then most likely Umbra was using up his willpower. From what he heard, Theodore's face was shrouded in bewilderment. Turning her attention to the lamppost, Veronica suggested that he should have told him earlier about how to use it, telling him about the rumors that said that the best experience was the one he himself would get, asking him not to dwell on it. After which, Veronica sat down on a nearby bench. Leaning her elbows on her, she said that first of all, Theodore must understand that will is not something that can be controlled by conventional means, noting that it recovers very quickly, stating that if he rests a little, he will quickly come to his senses. The main character tried to find out what will is. With a smile on her face, Veronica tried to answer his question. Having imagined in her head the image of a person from whom streams of aura emanated, Veronica stated that this is the primary power that people possess, saying that magic, auras and even spiritual abilities are all built on will. Veronica stated that everyone uses it, consciously or not, noting that most magicians rely only on mana and the use of circles, which is why they are not even aware of the existence of will. Recalling the image of Umbra, Veronica noted that this power is not like magic or an aura, adding that when you need to use an artifact from another universe, like Umbra, you cannot do without will. Bowing her head, she asked Theodore to imagine that Umbra was a beast from another universe where there was no magic at all, stating that in order to keep him in line, mana would not be able to be used. Drawing attention to his hand, the main character said that he understood this. In his thoughts, he believed that if he wanted to unlock the full potential of Umbra, then he needed to properly train his will. Hitting Theodore on the shoulder, Veronica declared that she was done with the lectures, asking if he had rested. Continuing to think, the main character noted that, on the other hand, such a cool power as astral rebirth must have some limitations. A sincere laugh was visible on Theodore's face. In his reflections, he stated that there is nothing easy in the world. After which, straightening her dress, Veronica stood up from the bench. Turning to the taken aback Theodore, Veronica tried to find out what he was going to do now. Smiling, she said that she still had some work to do at the ball, noting that everything would be fine if Theodore decided to go home. Veronica suggested that he was not too keen on such events. Closing his eyes, the main character replied that she was not very mistaken, thinking that if the ball had not been held in his honor, he would have simply returned to his place. Remembering the painted ceiling of the palace, Theodore noted that today he is the main character of this evening, adding that if he leaves without saying a word, then unpleasant rumors will definitely spread about him. Looking at Veronica, whose face was covered with a smile, the main character thought that she was with him until the very end. With a thoughtful expression on his face, Theodore froze in one position. Extending his hand to Veronica, he invited her to hit the road, noting that today he would stay with her a little longer. Smirking, Veronica wondered if this proposal should come up in a few years, after which she took Theodore's hand. Heading with him to the palace, she noted that the main character was not a timid one, adding that she did not mind. Raising his head, the stranger, whose body was covered with a red cloak, turned to Theodore Miller. The story takes us to the Andras Empire. Holding one of the chess pieces in his hands, the man noted that the main character had just turned 20, surprised that he had not only defeated the Elder Lick, but also saved the High Elf. Picking up a chess piece, he said that it sounded a bit exaggerated, asking where the evidence was that the rumors were true. The stranger in the red cloak reported that all sources indicate the accuracy of the information provided. Placing the piece on the chessboard, the man noted that he couldn't believe that such a strong hero like him showed up in Melter. Adjusting his cloak, the guy asked to convene all the swords nearby and send them to the kingdom of Melter as part of a delegation. Looking at the thoughtful stranger, the man noted that this guy, smirking, he stated that it did not matter what tales were told about Theodore Miller, asking him to check them. Smiling, the man noted that he was decisive, as always, suggesting that he too should answer straightforwardly as his majesty wished. With a confident expression on his face, he stated that a month ago, rumors of a heroic rescue of a high elf had spread in Melter, adding that at the Emperor's behest, they must verify the authenticity of these stories. Further, he said that he, Van Elianis, the fourth sword of Andras, was obliged to carry out the order of his lordship. Leaning on the throne, Kurt declared that this was absurd, asking if he was going to discuss a peace treaty only after confirming the relationship between Melter and Elfheim. Wary, he turned to Elianis and tried to find out if he was wrong. A malicious grin appeared on Elianis' face. Lowering his gaze, Kurt said that they should leave it at that for now, asking him to explain how Elianis was going to verify the truth of the rumors, wondering if he planned to send another delegation. Clenching his hands into fists, Elianis stated that words were not enough for the night, noting that even if this was the testimony of the elves. Clenching his fist again, he said that the Empire had only one law, which was that one must prove the truth by force. With a distraught look, turning to the king, Elianis asked to be allowed to meet the main character. Snapping his fingers, Vince froze in one position. Looking at Theodore, who was trying to catch his breath, he suggested that he finish for today, noting that next time they would train his will. Smiling, Vince said that he was unlikely to be useful here. Raising his head, the protagonist stated that this was not so, adding that without his advice, he would never have figured out how to use these powers. Vince was sure that Theodore would have come up with a couple of ways himself. Putting his hand to his face, the main character asked to begin. Clenching his hand into a fist, the main character activated astral rebirth. Concentrating, Theodore thought about a body that could overcome the limits of gravity and go beyond the material world, and about the skill that Food had managed to master in less than a month, noting that thanks to this he was able to do what was considered impossible. Lowering his gaze, Theodore was lost in his thoughts, after which, having activated the astral technique, the main character left his body. Taking notice of him, Vince thought that he was not very precise in his movements, adding that this ability was almost no different from flickering. Continuing the race, Theodore thought that he would continue in the same spirit. With lightning speed, he got behind Vince and took a fighting stance. Frozen in one position, Vince thought that he expected this from the main character, calling it incredible, noting that his other version was moving at great speed, adding that astral rebirth does not exist in the material world, which makes it much more difficult to detect. Wary in his thoughts, he reported that even the sensitivity of the aura masters, comparable to the simultaneous perception of the inhabitants of an entire village, would not be enough to capture the moments of the disappearance and appearance of the main character. From the immense power that enveloped Theodore's body, he screamed. Looking into the void, Vince noted the incredible expenditure of willpower and the terrible pain that could only be endured. With a thoughtful expression on his face, Vince thought that this pain was nothing more than a sign that Theodore's will was strengthening. Turning his attention to the main character, who wiped his face, Vince said that he had advanced so much that he could forget what he was like a month ago, noting that he had recently mastered the 5th circle, but was now close to catching up with him, saying that a little time would pass and even he would not be able to withstand Theodore. Putting his hands in his pocket, Vince asked the main character not to be so impatient, recalling his words, which were that he had already reached the top in the magic of the 5th circle, saying that if he wanted to move on, he needed to move on to new level. Closing his eyes, he said that he knew this feeling of helplessness and anxiety, noting that Theodore's haste and impatience would only cause harm. Taken aback, the main character tried to find out what to do in this case. Cupping his palms, Vince stated that if Theodore were a run-of-the-mill magician, then training harder would be a better choice. Imagining a magical artifact in his head, Vince noted that if the main character again manages to embody something like the Elder Lick's vessel of life, then with the help of gluttony he will be able to overcome the barrier of the new circle. Surprised, Theodore suggested that it might work. After imagining the image of mysterious creatures in his head, the main character stated that high magicians rarely manage to go beyond the 6th circle, thinking about the familiar feeling of despair when you can do nothing but try again and again, noting that he has gluttony, an artifact who can absorb the abilities of powerful magicians, adding that he absorbed the vessel of life and crossed the 5th circle in an instant, suggesting that it was indeed possible. Turning his head, Vince said that Theodore was feeling better now, adding that in that case, they could continue. Further, Vince said that if they hesitated, they would run out of time. The main character was amazed and surprised by the time period, after which Vince directed his hand towards the door. Opening it, he found a girl who, asking for forgiveness, suggested that they were still engaged. Wary, Vince said that there was nothing wrong with it, asking if he could be of any help. Smiling, the girl tried to find out if Vince Heidel and Theodore Miller were in front of her. After what was said, the guys reported that this was so. After giving Vince the letter, the girl stated that the Academy had sent an important message, and she had come to convey it, noting that the matter concerned both of them. Bringing it to his face, Vince read that to all the high magicians located in the capital, the Andras Empire had recently expressed a desire to send a delegation to them. The girl's face was shrouded in genuine delight. Also, Vince read that those who received this message were asked to gather in the main hall of the Magic Academy. Various discussions were heard throughout the palace. At the throne where Kurt was, stood his subordinate. Turning to Vince, who was standing next to him, Theodore said that he had heard that these people prefer to talk to each other with swords, suggesting that they are also capable of diplomacy. Vince noted that these people understand politics. Leaning towards Theodore, he said that the country could not rely on its army alone, adding that their knowledge of how to use combat power made Andras a force to be reckoned with. Looking at Vince, the main character asked if he was talking about combat power. Vince stated that the delegation was here to discuss the treaty signed during the last war, noting that Theodore was of course also the reason. From what he heard, the main character was shocked. Imagining the image of a terrifying monster in his head, Vince said that what they were most interested in was Theodore's connection with Elfheim and the High Elves, adding that they were probably suspicious of the heroic tales that were spread a month ago, thinking that the ambassadors wanted to evaluate what he was capable of Theodore and then move on to negotiations. Taken aback, the protagonist said that international relations are indeed complicated. Vince noted that this was a sign that Theodore was important, adding that his status as benefactor of the elves was much more significant than he thought. Standing at the entrance doors, his subordinates called out to Kurt, who said that the Andres Empire delegation had arrived. With a stern look, Kurt asked them to enter. Opening the doors, someone announced that the savages from Andres were finally here, wondering what kind of nonsense they would talk about this time. A grin was visible on Elianus's face. One of his subordinates was visible behind him. Turning their attention to them, the members of the nobility present began to exchange words. Elianus's face was filled with confidence. Bowing down, he announced that he was the fourth sword of the almighty Andres. Introducing himself as Van Elianus, he greeted the son of Melter. Raising his palm, the unknown person said that he was the seventh sword of the almighty Andres. Introducing himself as Lloyd Forlin, he greeted the son of Melter. Wary, Kurt noted that he had not seen Elianus for a long time. With a serious expression on his face, Elianus said that this was so, adding that today is their first meeting since the signing of the last agreement. Putting his hand to his face, Kurt stated that he was sure that they had known each other long enough, noting that he was not in the mood for formalities, asking them to let him ask directly and frankly. With an angry expression on his face, Kurt wondered if they had come to extend the peace treaty, or if they had come with the hope of another war. Laughing and piercing the red eyes of his interlocutor, Van Elianus with a scar on his face sarcastically reported that for the Knights of Adraz, words are not enough, even if it is the testimony of elves. Clenching his gloved hand tightly into a fist, he declared that the Empire had only one law, requiring that truth be proven by force. While a strong shadow fell on his face, the knight with a malicious grin impressively turned to his majesty, asking him to allow him to meet the young master. One of the assembled men in beige robes threw off his hood, shocked that Andres' knights wanted to challenge Theodore, declaring that even if the guy was the hero of Melter, a magician of the fifth circle would not be able to resist the master of the sword, while a bald colleague with a tie looked at him in bewilderment. The main character, standing in the ranks of the Viscounts, indulged in thoughts about the Andres Empire, beginning to frown deeply. He recalled that this is a powerful nation, better known as the Empire of Blades, which has been at war with the Kingdom of Melter for hundreds of years. This state is known for its 7 ball masters, but its real symbol is duels. Instead of using training weapons, knights fight for real and fight to the death, so killings in such fights are common in the Empire. The ruler with the golden wreath leaned forward a little, informing the arriving knight that they had heard about the Andres Empire using duels as an excuse for murder. After these words, the man frowned in anger, declaring with irritation that even though Theodore was a hero, he was only 20 years old, and adding that a man who called himself a sword master should be ashamed. Sir Elianus reacted to these words of the ruler with a sarcastic grin, saying that he had not planned anything so vile, because if he had killed the guy, he would not only not have benefited the Empire, but would also have turned the elves against him. A man with a scar and armor and a red cloak, standing in front of the ruler's throne, said that he only wanted to make an offer that would be beneficial to both parties. His Majesty cast a frowning glance at the knight, declaring that since he continued to insist on his own, words could not solve the matter, to which Elianus readily agreed. With a sarcastic sneer, the scarred man loudly called out Rebecca's name. Everyone gathered in the ruler's hall stood waiting when the girl entered the room. The stranger in a black robe introduced herself as Rebecca, a student of the 4th Ball of the Empire, Van Elianus, and greeted the son Melter. The ruler of Melter was stunned by the girl's appearance, causing his yellow eyes to widen, noting that she was a swordswoman and the same age as Viscount Miller. Theodore, looking at Rebecca walking along the red carpet, concluded that even though they were about the same age, she radiated the aura of a master. Even though this was the guy's first meeting, the main character had the feeling that he had already seen her somewhere. Crunching his fingers, Knight Elianus seriously turned to his majesty, deciding to ask his question again. The man clenched his teeth, baring his teeth terribly, and with red eyes burning with rage, he asked if they could arrange a magnificent waltz of swords and magic between the young heroes of the two nations. From a large window with wrought iron bars, bright sunlight entered the room, and thick green curtains were open. The ruler of Melter, Theodore and Blundell gathered in the room on green sofas, discussing the treachery of the 4th sword of the Andres Empire, and the gray-haired old man with a slight chuckle said that he was very intrusive, because he knew in advance that he would be refused, so he behaved that way. Closing his eyes and smiling widely, the head of the Blue Tower stated that for the night this was just an excuse to stall for time, and if the offer had not been accepted, he would have found another way to stay here. Being in great confusion, His Majesty scratched his head, declaring that now this man would search the entire capital to collect information for him, and adding that he could not stand making concessions to the Knight of Andres. He thought intently that even if the White Tower was keeping a close eye on the delegation, there were 2 sword masters among the ambassadors, and it was unlikely that Melter's top brass would be able to restrict their movements. Lowering his hand to his leg, the ruler gloomily concluded that it was necessary to send the strangers back to the Empire as soon as possible in order to prevent them from learning too much. Afterwards, the man turned to Theodore, directly saying that he was not at all obliged to accept Sir Elianus's offer, and if he refused, then it would not harm Melter in any way. His Majesty looked at the young Viscount with enthusiasm, asking whether he could defeat the girl knight Rebecca. Theodore, frowning, answered in the affirmative with a serious look. Then the ruler looked piercingly at the guy, asking whether he could do this even without the ability of a national treasure. Lowering his alarmed gaze, the main character again answered in the affirmative. Then the ruler of Melter turned to the head of the Red Tower, Veronica, and the head of the Blue Tower, Blundell, sitting opposite, asking what they thought about this. The red-haired lady, winking and smiling slyly, said that if the delegation held 10 fights, Theodore would win 9 of them, and the 10th would be a draw, so, in her opinion, Theo would definitely not lose. After these words, the ruler asked with interest whether the guy was really that good, and Veronica, stretching in her chair, confidently replied that there was no need to even doubt it. Blundell enthusiastically declared that he agreed with the words of the head of the Red Tower, adding that it was not yet obvious, but the boy would definitely win. However, in the old man's opinion, it was better not to flaunt their confidence. After listening to the magicians, Kurt closed his eyes and confidently concluded with a soft smile that in this case he saw no reason to refuse the fight. Afterwards, he turned to the minister with a monocle and a white suit, who was busy reading a book, asked to bring him a peace treaty and draw up a list of lands available for annexation, taking into account any conditions that the Kingdom of Melter might put forward. Bald, mustachioed Everton, with a pen in his hands, seriously declared that he would carry out His Majesty's orders. Lost in thought, Kurt decided that when he thought about it, something was clearly wrong. He began to rub his fingers over the tip of his pointed beard, concluding that defeating the Elder Lick and rescuing the High Elf could not be a success achieved alone. After some thought, Kurt turned to Theodore with enthusiasm, deciding to entrust him with a new important matter right now, which made the guy taken aback. The ruler with a piercing gaze said that the main character does not need to be modest, because he has done so much for the Kingdom of Melter that the lands donated by the crown are no longer enough to reward him, asking the young Viscount not to hide his own merits. With folded hands, Kurt said that the Andres Empire has always chosen violence over dialogue, and its representatives violate borders, trying to steal the kingdom's crops, attack innocent citizens, and set fire to the Dhamma, taking the last wealth from Melter. The man raised one hand, extending it to Theodore, and addressed the guy. Kurt said with a smile that the young man is the pride of their kingdom and must win in order to teach the foreigners the history of their nation, as well as show what karma they have accumulated over the years and how strong an enemy they have made for themselves. Looking intently at his interlocutor, the ruler promised that after the battle he would adequately reward the Viscount for his victory. Continuing to look at the guy and clenching his hand into a fist, the man said that he was counting on Theodore. I put my fist to my chest. The main character enthusiastically said that he proudly accepted the order of His Majesty. The action moves to the arena, where Theodore and Rebecca stood ready, waiting for the battle to begin. Looking around, the guy recognized almost all those gathered and concluded that among them, about 80% of the forces of Melter's entire force were now in the arena. He regarded his red-haired opponent, Rebecca of the Andres Empire, standing with her hood down and mask on as the judge announced her name. The girl looked at the concentrated Theodore, Viscount of the Kingdom of Melter, when his name was heard. Judge Blundell, standing between the opponents with a weapon, clarified whether they were ready to start the fight, to which they unanimously answered so sure. The old man struck the ground with his staff and pierced the ground beneath it. The head of the Blue Tower, in a haze, said with a smile that when he hit the ground with his staff, the battle would begin, and now the representatives of the two nations had to take an oath. Afterwards, Blundell, with his eyes wide open, loudly pronounced an oath, declaring that the winner would be merciful to the loser, and the loser would show respect to the winner, and when the fight was over, it would be forbidden to continue the fight. Theodore, with a concentrated look, agreed with the old man's words, saying that he swears. Lowering her head a little, the red-haired girl in the mask replied that she was also taking an oath. A wide smile appeared on the face of the head of the Blue Tower when he realized that the battle could begin. He slammed his staff hard right between the opponents, announcing that the battle had begun, and the ground near them began to shake from the powerful blow. Rebecca looked at her opponent with a concentrated look, holding two red blades at the ready. When the blade of one of the swords was pointed at the guy, he put out his palm with a sharp movement, protecting himself from the blow. Theodore repelled his opponent's attack with one jerk, causing her to fly to the side. Looking at the main character in shock, Rebecca assessed his movements. The next moment, the girl swung her leg, delivering a powerful blow and throwing the young man back. The two spectators, covered in beads of sweat, were indignant and in great shock at how quickly the swordswoman from the Andres Empire attacked, considering her too young for such a role. The seventh swordsman of the Empire, Lloyd Forlin, watched the battle with a thoughtful look with his glowing red eye, placing his hand to his chin. Watching Rebecca's attack, the knight happily concluded that this was exactly what was expected of Andres' next generation of swordsmen. The fighting style of a girl with two blades is unimaginable, and with her current level of skill, she will definitely achieve her goal. Theodore, casting a cold glance at his opponent, continued to think that he had seen this before, remembering what her technique was like. The guy concluded that Rebecca's fighting style very much reminded him of the technique of the captain of the Wandering Wolves, Sir Randolph. Theodore threw a burning red gaze, full of rage, at his opponent, realizing that due to thoughts his last attack was delayed for a second, and he raised his fist for another blow. The main character was already looking around thoughtfully with a calm look, asking who could be this creepy bearer of bloodlust. Theodore noticed the figure of Knight Lloyd in the haze of fog, wondering if it might have come from the man in the distance. The seventh swordsman from the Andras Empire, who hid his face under a dark mask, looked piercingly at the curious young man with a burning eye. Theodore continued his thoughts regarding Rebecca's technique, stunned to realize that he and Randolph might be related or students of the same teacher. The enemy, meanwhile, cast a cold glance at the guy, deciding to strike and holding her blades at the ready. The young swordswoman suddenly flew up to Theodore, making a crosscut with her blades, after which a blinding light began to emanate from the weapon. When the main character began to be carried back by the shock wave, he put his hands forward, concluding that there was no time to think about it because now he needed to win. The guy clenched his teeth from tension and frowned, deciding to concentrate and first incapacitate his opponent, and small electrical discharges began to emanate from his hand. Putting his hand forward towards Rebecca, Theodore activated the chain lightning technique, and strong magical energy began to emanate from his palm. The focused swordswoman, without taking her eyes off the guy, swung her blade, from which a light red haze emanated. Frowning, she looked contemptuously at Theodore, striking him with blades and loudly shouting to fight with honor, from which the young man began to fly back again. Extending both hands with lightning bolts forward, the stunned Theodore, with clenched teeth, mentally asked if his opponent was really able to repel the magic with her scream. He raised one hand back with rage and decided to strike the girl with a powerful blow with his magic. While in the air, he concentrated ball lightning in his hand and then sent it straight to Rebecca, standing below. While the ground shook, the girl held tightly to the lowered blades, asking the enemy if he really thought that it would work the second time. Rebecca put her hand forward with her sword, and the lightning flying at her from above began to deflect the red blade. The girl's blade was able to absorb the powerful attack of her opponent, and Theodore, continuing to be in the air, began to raise his right hand for a new blow, concentrating a flow of energy in it. The main character threw concentrated magic into the ground, and gigantic debris flew from it to the sides, and a strong explosion was formed with a bright flash. Rebecca stood with her head slightly lowered and a long red blade held out in front of her. The girl stuck her swords into the ground, squatted down and glanced at her opponent, telling the wizard Melter that it was a good attack. Theodore watched with bewilderment the approaching figure of Rebecca, wondering in surprise whether she really did not feel pain at all, and also withstood ball lightning without additional protection. Looking down, the guy concluded that she was a difficult opponent, and it seemed that she could not be defeated with ordinary spells. Theodore mused that with a magic missile everything would be easier, concluding with annoyance that he might accidentally overdo it. Glancing at the concentrated opponent, the guy decided that he couldn't allow Randolph's relative to die at his hands. After some thought, the main character sighed, holding his collar. The next second, he was already rushing at full speed towards the taken aback Rebecca, activating the battle song sonata of speed at the tempo of a libretto as he went. A bald man from the crowd of spectators with a stunned look asked if the young Viscount was really closing the distance, not believing that the wizard could decide on close combat. When Theodore was already close to Rebecca, she was indignant, declaring that the guy was completely crazy, like all the wizards of the Red Tower. The girl cast a dissatisfied glance at her opponent, calling him an arrogant bastard and asking if he really decided to go to his forefathers. When Theodore was standing very close, Rebecca fiercely rushed at him, swinging her sword and shouting that he should not dare to look down on the Knight Andras, and the guy managed to bend over so that the blow would not hit him. Watching the girl's movements, the main character, with an open mouth and frowning eyebrows, concluded that Rebecca is fast, noting that she, like Randolph, specializes in speed. The opponent cast an alarmed glance at Theodore, and he concluded that she was far from so good. As Rebecca continued to strike quickly with her sword, Theodore, who was crouching down, concluded that her movements were slower than her pride. During the girl's attack, the young Viscount, looking full of rage, began to raise his fist, concentrating blue energy in it. Theodore directed a powerful stream of energy at the girl, leaving red streaks in space from the sharp blade. Rebecca's eyes burned with rage as she approached the guy, holding her blades crossed in front of her chest, and the main character pointed his fist at her. The girl looked at Theodore with contempt, unable to believe that he was able to repel the attack from such a position, because in this case he was faster than her. While Theodore was preparing for a new blow, concentrating magic in his fist, the girl flew up furiously above him. The main character, with a menacing grin, cast an enraged glance at his opponent, raising his fist and activating the technique of uniting all magic circles. Energy circles were now passing through his hand one after another, and the guy looked menacing. Rebecca gave her opponent a crazy look. Theodore activated a 5-link shockwave with powerful jerks, raising a whirlwind. With his legs spread wide, the guy extended his fist forward with shining blue energy. Raising his concentrated gaze at the flying girl, Theodore concluded in his thoughts that it was too early to relax, because his opponent was the Knight of Andres. Without taking his eyes off his opponent, the young Viscount thought that she could well survive such an attack. If she gets up, then she needs to strike immediately. Suddenly the guy's eyes widened in surprise as he noticed something shocking. In front of him in a foggy haze stood a scarred knight with a sword on his shoulder, and Theodore, confused, clarified whether it was Sir Van Elianis. Approaching Theodore, the swordsman reported that the Andres Empire was accepting defeat, and noted that the guy was superior to his student in battle. Grinning and narrowing his eyes, Sir Elianis thanked the young man for leaving Rebecca alive. Throwing a bored glance at the approaching man, Theodore clarified with slight dissatisfaction what this meant. Sir Van Elianis clutched the hilt of his massive sword tightly in his hand. He calmly declared that in this battle the Andres Empire was defeated, and this outcome was recognized in the name of the Seven Swords. The spectators in the stands were greatly shocked by these words. After that, the seventh swordsman of the Andres Empire turned around and walked towards the student who was lying unconscious on the ground while Theodore continued to stand in place. Looking back at the wizard Melter, Elianis said with a grin that the rumors were true and the young man was able to show outstanding abilities. Continuing to approach Rebecca, the man said that if the young man becomes even stronger, then perhaps the Knight of Andres himself will challenge him to a duel. Watching Sir Elianis walking away with the girl's body, Theodore mentally concluded that he had no idea what was in this man's head, realizing that the thirst for blood definitely belonged to him. Now he recalled how, before the decisive blow, he felt someone's terrifying desire to kill. The nurse, holding Theodore's bandaged hand, said that he was lucky that the blade went in shallowly. With genuine delight, she admitted that this fight was impressive and added that she used a basic healing spell and bandaged everything. In her opinion, the wound would heal in about 3 days. Theodore thanked the nurse, saying that he was much better now, to which the nurse replied with a slight smile that she should be grateful to him. Standing opposite the lying Theodore, the nurse told him that in the infirmaries they were used to seeing the wounded and fallen, and that for them, unable to go onto the battlefield with them, victory was always nothing more than an image. With her hand on her heart, the nurse said that today for the first time in her life she knew what victory really was. Continuing to keep her hand on her heart, she froze in one position, after which she bowed and said that it was an honor for her to heal the hero of their generation with her own hands. Theodore, embarrassed in response to the nurse's gratitude, added that she was exaggerating. Standing on the stairs, the nurse turned her head to the main character, saying that she was leaving him and reminding him not to forget to take the prescribed medications. Theodore accompanied the nurse as she walked down the stairs. After thinking, the main character confirmed his opinion that being in the center of attention of so many people is a burden. Turning his gaze to the other side, he called for a dark figure standing on the floor below to come out to him, calling him Sir Lloyd Forlin. Opening one eye, Forlin asked a rhetorical question about whether he had really been identified. Watching a dark figure ascend the stairs, Theodore asked him about the gala dinner, hinting that he should be there. In response, the figure stated that unfortunately Melter's cuisine and the local alcohol did not meet his preferences and that he had decided to take a walk around the area instead. Frowning, the main character turned to Forlin and asked why he came to him. Answering Theodore's question, Sir Lloyd stated that he had come to apologize. The main character, surprised, asked the dark figure. An image of the protagonist's past duel arose in Forlin's head and he stated that, as Theodore probably already knows, Sir Lloyd interfered in their duel with Rebecca, adding that it was surprising that a person who had not trained aura was so susceptible. Looking at his gloved hands, Forlin turned to Theodore with the words that he did not expect that the main character would be able to feel his accidentally bursting bloodlust. Because it was so small, the figure added that he was trembling with happiness. Stunned by Forlin's words, Theodore wondered in his mind whether Sir Lloyd had released that terrible will not to distract him, but because he actually wanted to kill. Sitting down on a chair, Forlin assured the main one, the hero, that he should not be so afraid, because the fourth sword strictly forbade him to touch Theodore. Grinning, Sir Lloyd added that he would not cut off the head of the main character, which he was very dissatisfied with. Gritting his teeth and then turning to the dark figure, Theodore asked him that he really wanted him dead so badly. At the question of the main character, Forlin thought, putting his hand to his chin, then looking back at Theodore and completely turning to face him. He wondered why a person like him was born in such a pathetic country of losers and not in their great state. Lifting his cloak, the man pointedly showed blade in its sheath and then looking with a piercing gaze at the main character. He stated that the peace treaty had been concluded for 10 years and that after this period Theodore would become Andres' most dangerous enemy. Taking out a blade from under his cloak, Forlin moved towards the main character, saying that his intuition had never failed him, then asking the question whether it would be wiser to finish off Theodore here and now, calling him a future threat to the Empire, to which the main character asked a counter question, would it be true? Forlin believes in something as irrational as intuition. Raising the blade to his face, the man stated that he knew that in that battle the main character did not reveal all his secrets. Pointing the red blade of the blade at Theodore, Sir Lloyd added that against the 7 future swords, those who would become the stronghold of the Empire, the protagonist dared to restrain his power. With wide eyes hidden behind a mask, Forlan notified Theodore that in order to definitely win the coming war, he would kill him right here and now. Looking closely at the scarlet blade of the Ill-Wisher, the main character was horrified in his thoughts at how monstrous the thirst for blood was and that it was so powerful that even pride could not compare with it. Turning sharply away from Theodore, the figure walked away from his bed to the stairs, so that 10 years later, when they meet again, the main character will not get off so easily. Still shocked, Theodore thought over the term of the contract in his mind, noting that it seemed like a long time, but in reality it wasn't that long. Continuing to think about what happened earlier, the main character noticed that the sword masters were truly terrifying and that there was a new obstacle in front of him that needed to be destroyed. The massive doors open, someone in the distance called the main character to come in, to which he apologized for the intrusion. Walking inside, Theodore noticed a guard. Looking around, the main character was surprised that they simply took him and let him in. Then he wondered that if they immediately realized that he had come, then why were they so hospitable to the enemy? A red-haired woman standing on the floor above asked Theodore why he was looking for her. The woman, looking intently at the protagonist rising towards her, asked whether he had come to exercise the right of the winner. Not understanding, Theodore asked the woman what she was talking about. The red-haired woman, holding her finger in front of her neck, said that the Empire does not spare the lives of the losers. Only the winner determines the fate of the opponent, and then in order to survive, the loser is obliged to offer something in return. While in thought, Theodore heard the woman's words that these were the general rules of a duel, and if one of the opponents refused to comply with them, then both he and his family would be executed. Looking at the woman's gesture, the hero realized in his thoughts that this is a world in which everything is decided force and that the rumors that the Empire was incapable of dialogue were not false. Putting one hand in his pocket and taking a confident pose, Theodore noticed that they were not in Andras now, but despite this, the woman still wanted to exchange her life for his, to which she answered in the affirmative to his question and added that she was her knight country's. Putting his hand to his chin, the main character chuckled and said that it was quite difficult for him to figure it out, because she had not yet understood what requests were acceptable in such conditions. But then turning to Rebecca, the main character said that he needed an answer to just one question. Looking up at the woman, Theodore notified her that he knew a man who had the same fighting technique as hers. Rebecca was surprised at such a statement, but the main character did not stop there, asking her whether she knew the name Randolph. Rebecca, in bewilderment, repeated the name Theodore said and asked how he knew this. With a neutral face, the main character suggested that the woman first tell herself everything she knows, and then perhaps he will also give her answers. Rebecca, sitting on the armrest, said that she understood Theodore, but first she decided to make a request to him. Realizing that if her words reached other people's ears, she would get a lot of trouble, so she asked the main character to make sure that no one around them heard them. Theodore agreed and a cloud of aura formed in his hand, and then turning towards the ceiling he used the silence technique. With a confident face, the protagonist assured Rebecca that any outgoing sounds were blocked. He turned to the thoughtful woman with the words that he was ready to listen to her and that she would tell everything connected with Randolph. Sitting opposite Rebecca, Theodore asked her what the story was about him and Randolph. The woman, lowering her eyes to the floor, stated that Randolph was her brother. An image of a brother with 2 swords popped into her head. The woman clarified that they had different mothers, but the same father. Looking up at the main character, she told him a story that says that once the Clovis family was a noble family and successors to the 7 swords of the Empire, to which Theodore asked her a question, clearly not expecting that these events took place in the past. Rebecca, remembering the past, said that it was 130 years ago. Against the backdrop of fragments of the past, she continued to tell the story to Theodore, where she noticed that her family, which was not yet rich, rose to prominence thanks to the existence of sword masters. A man in the shadows appeared in her thoughts and she continued the story, stating that the Clovises believed that the glorious era would last at least a century, adding that, however, their hopes for this were in vain. Against the backdrop of a dark silhouette playing chess, Rebecca said that one day the Emperor issued an imperial decree that said to find the black magician who caused riots throughout Andras and cut off his head. According to Rebecca, the 7 swords had no choice but to obey the order, and her ancestors crossed the borders of the Empire to destroy the sorcerer. Under the final move of the pawn made by the piece, the woman stated that her ancestors never returned, her clan failed to fulfill the Emperor's orders, and their sword master also disappeared during the search. Concluding her story, Rebecca said that since then the Clovis family began to lose its greatness. Sitting opposite Theodore with her legs crossed, the woman added that her father, who was the head, was very good with a blade and that finding a swordswoman with talent in the family was not at all difficult. Theodore wanted to ask the woman a question, but she interrupted him by immediately answering it, stating that even though they were half-blooded, they still had several siblings in common from their other mothers. With devastation on her face, she said that in one way or another, almost all the children that her father fathered were considered failures, adding that they were sold except for her and Randolph. Crossing her arms, Rebecca explained that the family needed to invest everything in one person to become a sword master. Recalling the past where she lay in bed, the red-haired woman revealed that despite the fact that the Clovis clan had squeezed out all the remaining resources, it was still not enough to train two, adding that eventually one of them had to become victim. Rebecca, remembering the image of her little brother, who was walking through the crowd with a sack, explained that this is why her brother ran away in the middle of the night without telling anyone, as she believes he did it for her sake. As Randolph leaves Rebecca a letter, she reveals that even though she found his letter saying they would meet one day, she still had no information about him. Theodore replayed the story in his head and concluded that the two-bladed ancestors Sir Randolph was looking for were the Clovis family. Looking at Rebecca with a piercing gaze, the main character stated that more than a month had passed since he saw her brother. Recalling past events where Randolph clashed with the Elder Lick, Theodore said that he was sent to his native place on a mission from the Scarlet Tower, adding that there he met with Sir Randolph. Against the background of Randolph's battle with the Lick, the main character said that they entered the Elder Lick's dungeon together and that they managed to deal with the monster. Turning to Rebecca, Theodore informed her that it seemed to him that he had managed to help Randolph a little in his search, to which Rebecca was surprised and asked if they had really found the missing ancestors of their family. Remembering the image of Randolph, the main character confirmed the woman's thoughts and stated that her brother was close to becoming a sword master. Rebecca placed her hand on her chin and closed her eyes, and assumed with slight joy that her brother was still the same. Suddenly, two guards in red cloaks called out to them, saying that it was time for them to leave. Standing up and pushing back his chair, the main character said that their time was over and he was leaving. Turning to Rebecca, Miller said to her that he hoped she would get better soon. Rebecca called out to the main character, telling him that he never took advantage of the privileges of the winner and asked him to promise her that he would definitely do it later. Against the backdrop of a stone city, the main character speaks in his thoughts that 4 days later, agreements were concluded between the two countries, and since Melter emerged victorious from the friendly match, Andres had no choice but to accept the unattractive conditions. Continuing to think while leaning on the wooden railing, Theodore noticed that less than 6 days had passed since the representatives of the Empire left Monaville. With a slightly surprised face, the main character was amazed that these 6 days flew by so quickly. Using the Hawkeye technique, Theodore's pupil constricted. Below, he noticed Rebecca, who was riding a horse. Noticing that she was sitting behind, the main character noticed that she most likely had not yet fully recovered to travel on horseback herself. Looking away from the girl and thinking that she managed to survive his shockwaves more than 5 times, he noticed that it was a miracle that she was still breathing. Recalling his duel with Rebecca, Theodore noted that during that battle he was able to fully sense the power of an aura user, and he also assumes that if they meet again one day, Rebecca will be much stronger than she is now. Raising his hand and looking at the bandages, the main character wondered if he could remove the bandages. Noticing that the arm looks as if everything has healed, an unknown figure appeared behind the main character and called him by name. With a questioning expression on his face, Theodore turned to the figure and said how he could be useful. The guy enthusiastically announced that he had finally found the main character and, introducing himself by the name Andy, explained that he was from the Central Department of the Magic Academy. Andy stated that he had orders to bring Theodore to the president's office, to which the main character was surprised. Andy, with an enthusiastic face, said that the invitation came from the president personally and that if possible, he wanted Theodore to arrive as soon as possible. In his thoughts, the main character remembered that, as a rule, magicians have no reason to visit such places. He was wondering what happened. To see the cities from a bird's eye view, the main character agreed and will go to the president. Walking inside the building, Theodore noticed the statue, wondering in his head what this terrible-looking statue was. Appearing in front of the two figures, the main character introduced himself and greeted the president of the academy and the master of the Scarlet Tower. The president in turn was delighted to see the main character. With his hands folded in front of him, the president of the academy assured Theodore that he was just in time and that he apologized for calling so suddenly, adding that a situation had arisen due to which he had no other choice. Sitting down opposite the president, the main character reassured him by saying that he was not busy with anything anyway. In response, the president invited Theodore to sit down. With Veronica sitting in the background, the president addressed the main character that he had done well that time and that they were not sure that Andreas would accept their conditions, especially due to the circumstances associated with the High Elf. Then he added that it was possible it's safe to say that Theodore made the greatest contribution to the new agreement. The main character just grinned. Such praise seemed too serious to him. Narrowing his eyes, the president suggested that his words would not be mere flattery, noting that he himself knew about it, asking if it was so. The main character suggested that the reason for the call may be related to the reward. In turn, the president of the academy confirmed Theodore's assumption, saying that he and the lords of the towers held a long meeting and finally decided on the prize for the main character. According to the president, the subject is still kept in the strictest confidence. He felt that a public award would cause unnecessary resonance. The president asked Theodore to remember that only he and the lords of the towers knew about this thing. With a serious face, the president said that if information leaks somewhere, even the main character will not be able to escape punishment. Veronica turned to the president and reminded him that she had said that it was not necessary to intimidate, to which the president replied that it was better to warn. Suddenly, the statue behind him spoke, putting forward his candidacy for explanation. Theodore, looking over his shoulder, was surprised to see a talking statue behind him and wondered how a statue could even talk. Sticking out his tongue and giggling disgustingly, the statue stated that he had not seen such a reaction for a long time. Suddenly, the statue was punched. Veronica, rubbing her fist, turned to the statue and said not to scare the main character, calling the stone monster a crooked utensil. Then Veronica irritably asked the question that didn't she tell her not to laugh like that because it was very loud, to which the statue snapped back calling her a crazy dragon. Veronica, surprised by such impudence, wondered that someone was planning to depart to another world today. Hitting the statue with a powerful blow, Veronica wished death on the statue. The room was filled with rising dust from the force of the impact. Theodore nervously turned to the president, to which he stated that he would not like to introduce them so chaotically, but that's what happened. Against the background of a statue shrouded in dust, the president said that as Theodore could see, this is an unusual statue and that how it moves, what it is made of, all this remains a mystery. According to the president, only one person is able to control golems, and also added that even the wizards of the Seventh Circle have not achieved this. Against the background of the dissatisfied face of the statue, the president said that the magician hiding his identity is the ruler of the Amber Tower, Norton, adding that it is he who controls this statue. After Veronica delivered her powerful blow, the president of the academy noted that, as she saw, the statue was far from ordinary. The president of the academy said that how it moves, what it consists of is all unknown to them, noting that in the whole world only one person is able to control it, telling about Norton, who was the lord of the Amber Tower. Looking at the stunned statue, he noted that there was no doubt that it was Norton who controlled the statue. Wary in his thoughts, the main character announced the master of the Amber Bath, who was a magician, whose face has never been seen and no one knows his age and race. Imagining Norton in his head, whose face was shrouded in shadow, Theodore noted that if rumors were to be believed, he could refuse the king a general mobilization of magicians, saying that only the other lords of the towers and the ruler himself were allowed to meet with him. With his hands on his side, the president of the academy said that Norton's appearance in public could only be seen once or twice every 100 years. From his words, Theodore was greatly taken aback. Averting his gaze, the president of the academy asked the main character not to be surprised, since the lord of the Amber Tower is mysterious and there are still many things that keep much greater secrets. Looking at the documents lying on the shelves of the office, he said that according to the records of the central office, it was Norton who created the plans for the 4 towers, adding that he also contributed to the prosperity of Melter during the birth of the country. Further, the president of the academy said that in medicine, alchemy, metallurgy, and architecture, the level of this magician is comparable to the divine, noting that it is for this reason that there are so many amazing goods and artifacts on the entrusted continent. Lowering his gaze, turning to the president of the academy, Theodore tried to find out how old Norton was. Wary, the president noted that there were at least 600. In his thoughts, the main character stated that even elves only live to be 200. With a worried expression on his face, Theodore thought that among the high elves there were those who were more than 3,000 years old, adding that magic was an art that developed only among humans when other races could hardly master it, wondering who the Lord of the Amber Towers. Squinting his eyes, the president of the academy said that so far no one has figured out the secret of Norton's identity, which is why there is no point in racking his brains over it now, noting that if he has been hiding for more than 600 years, then there must be a reason for this. Drawing attention to the nearby statue, the president of the academy said that when Norton wishes, then he will show himself to the whole world, saying that theories about who he is are useless, asking Theodore not to think about it. Turning to the guys, indignant, the statue said that it had been damaged, asking if Veronica had any idea how long it would take to repair it. Turning around, Veronica stated that the Scarlet Tower would take care of compensation, asking for the goods. Smirking, the statue said that she would now provide them with the MK37 sensitivity enhancer. After that, the main character tried to find out what she was talking about. Placing her hand on her side, the statue noted that since Theodore was a magician, he should know how important sensitivity is, adding that neither training nor even medicine can increase it. After putting the pill in his mouth, the statue announced the device. Smirking, she stated that he could increase her level even if it seemed impossible before. Looking at the tablet in his thoughts, the main character wondered if it was a sensitivity enhancer. Continuing to examine it, the system reported that it was a drug synthesized using Eastern and Western alchemy, noting that rare materials and ancient technology were used to create it, which significantly increases sensitivity to mana. The system stated that the value of the drug was equal to that of a treasure, and when consumed it would increase certain characteristics since it had no digestion period, adding that Theodore's understanding of alchemy would also increase exponentially. The system informed him that the drug would be more effective effective if taken orally rather than through gluttony, and that once consumed he would become immune to the properties, noting that repeated use would have no effect. Surprised, the main character thought that increasing sensitivity had previously seemed like a fantasy, saying that for a wizard like him who was almost deprived of it, such a drug was simply a gift from heaven. Patting Theodore on the back, Veronica asked him to swallow the drug quickly, noting the confidence that the result would not take long to arrive. After which, the main character wondered if he should drink it now. Taken aback, Theodore announced that he understood, asking if he needed to eat while it's hot. Delighted, Veronica noted that he grasped it on the fly. Looking around the expanses of the Academy President's office, Veronica reported that 3 rulers were looking after Theodore, suggesting that one of them would not be able to help him, but would not harm him either. Lowering his gaze, looking at the tablet, Theodore thought that this was so, noting that with 2 magicians of this level, he was in no danger. The protagonist's face was shrouded in doubt and anxiety, after which, opening his mouth, Theodore prepared to absorb it. The system reported that he had used the MK37 sensitivity enhancer, adding that the power contained within him was gradually being revealed. The system reported that the user's mana had increased to maximum, noting that he would soon feel a temporary surge in all senses, asking him to concentrate. After swallowing it, the main character stated that it had an unusual taste, asking if that was all. Suddenly, his face was shrouded in genuine horror. Falling to the floor, Theodore thought that he could not breathe. Approaching the lying protagonist, Veronica asked him to pull himself together and not dare to deny the mana around him. Screaming, she stated that mana had always been there, adding that Theodore had not felt it before. Trying not to lose consciousness in his thoughts, the protagonist reported that this was not the case, noting that he simply did not know. I look at the stunned Theodore, Veronica asked him to use magic. After which, holding 2 fingers up, the main character prepared to create the technique. Baring his teeth, he used an electric shock. The technique that emerged from his fingertips thundered throughout the entire office. Surprised, Theodore reported that he felt better. Leaning on his hand, continuing to think, he declared that he understood how mana felt. Veronica tried to find out if the main character had finally come to his senses. With a look full of surprise, Theodore said that he felt something in the air that seemed impossible to exist, noting that it was simply amazing. Looking into the void, he said that some say that mana is like water, and for others it is like mud or like fire. Crossing his legs, Theodore thought that he could not understand their words, believing that he never could, wondering if geniuses like Sylvia had such sensitivity. Folding her hands, Veronica suggested that everything was fine, asking Theodore to be careful with his magic, as after taking this drug, the speed of casting spells and their power would increase, adding that his control of mana required practice. Turning his head in her direction, the protagonist suggested that having high sensitivity is not enough. Smiling, Veronica said that this was so, saying that a high level of sensitivity and magic is good, noting that individually they are nothing special. Further, she stated that if a magician has problems with one or the other, then there is no point in rising to the next circles. Having raised Theodore, Veronica said that there are people with high sensitivity, adding that at the same time they are simply amazing simpletons, which is why the main character should not turn up his nose and continue to train. Outraged in its thoughts, the statue wondered what Veronica was doing with Theodore. Confused, the main character said that this was not what she thought. Veronica asked the statue to stop showing his scary face. Turning its head in her direction, the statue said that she needed to talk to Theodore alone anyway, asking her to leave. Beside herself with rage, Veronica tried to find out if she had been told to leave. After which, the president of the academy said that they would leave immediately. Looking at the statue clenching its fist, Veronica said that next time she would not get off so easily, calling it a terrible piece of stone. Veronica's outrageous exclamations were heard from the slammed door. Smirking, the statue noted that he had expected this, saying that the main character was unusual. Placing a finger on its chin, the statue spoke about the reaction to mana and the smell of Theodore's spirit, suggesting that Veronica was not exaggerating about him becoming the next master of the Scarlet Tower. With an embarrassed expression on his face, the main character thanked him for what he said. The statue said that this was just an objective assessment, congratulating Theodore as the first test subject for, after which, informing him that this was not the case, she congratulated him as the heir to the power of his drug, adding that she would remember his name. Smirking, the statue noted that they would not see each other for some time, declaring that they would definitely meet at the right moment, asking Theodore to wait for now. With a look full of madness, turning to the main character, she said that when the time comes, they will discuss the secret hidden deep within him. Having evaporated, the statue said goodbye to Theodore. Surprised, the main character wondered if the statue could find out about gluttony. Being on his hand, the magical grimoire asked him to be careful with the Lord of the Amber Tower. Looking at Theodore, who was taken aback, Gluttony stated that the formula and alchemy in that drug were used 2000 ago, noting that he not only knows about them, but also understands how to use them. Smiling, the magical grimoire said that he had several ideas on this matter, adding that it was impossible to say anything for sure right now. With a serious expression on his face, asking him to stop, Theodore tried to find out if he believed that the Lord of the Amber Tower was also the owner of the grimoire. Gluttony noted that he was only based on the information he received, adding that this is also possible. The magic grimoire stated that even if he has a grimoire, he uses it very refined and effectively. Grinning, Gluttony noted that it would be unlikely to attack the Lord of the Amber Tower suddenly, like the Elder Lick. Averting his gaze, the main character thought that the Master of the Amber Tower was hiding his identity, and the Lord of the Pearl Tower was wearing a mask, saying that someday he would definitely find out about everything, adding that not now. Clenching his fist as he turned to Norden, Theodore wondered if he was saying that they would see each other again. At this moment, the unknown person was actively working on a typewriter. Sitting in the shadows, the unknown person became interested, noting that so much time had passed. A malicious grin appeared on his face the moment he addressed Gluttony. There was a fierce battle between the main character and Sylvia. Squeezing the staff in her hands, Sylvia activated an ice arrow. At the moment when she fired magical projectiles towards Theodore, he, in turn, managed to form a magical barrier. Clenching his fist, he prepared to strike back. Having created a powerful flame, the main character released it towards Sylvia. Looking at the cloud of dust that appeared, Theodore thought that in order to curb his sharply increased sensitivity to mana after absorbing the sensitivity enhancer, he asked Sylvia to help him with training. Looking at Sylvia, on whose staff a cloud of unimaginably powerful aura had formed, and continuing to think, he noted that being a magician with an innate and incredible sensitivity to mana, as well as the ability to learn, there was no one who could be better suited to her in his training. Smiling, turning to Theodore, Sylvia tried to find out if he could still continue. Smirking, the main character stated that it was so, after which, with lightning speed, the guys rushed towards each other. With a look of admiration, Sylvia called Theodore incredible, noting that only a week ago he was unable to react to such a thing, adding that she expected this from him. With an embarrassed look, the main character thought that she was flattering him. In his thoughts, he said that sensitivity training was much easier than he expected, saying that the only snag was the problem with casting spells. Raising his palm, continuing to think, he stated that in magic, a spell is just his own interpretation of magic. The main character doubted that when using spells, the effectiveness of magicians increased exponentially, adding that because of this, magicians became very fixated on spells. Wary, Theodore froze in one position. Having created ice projectiles around himself, the main character said aloud a spell that allows him to do this. Stretching his hands forward, he shouted the fourth magic circle spell, Thunder Spear. Clasping his palms, Theodore cast the fourth magic circle, Storm. Lowering his gaze, he noted that he had not used spells much before, after which, magical projectiles that appeared in the air headed towards Sylvia. Putting her staff forward, Sylvia managed to activate a magical barrier, which blocked Theodore's fall. Surprised, she thought about 3 different elements and 3 different magic circles, wondering how the protagonist was able to use them all at once. From what she saw, Sylvia's gaze was shrouded in bewilderment. Theodore appeared before her eyes, directing his fire technique in her direction. Putting his hand behind his back, he prepared to attack. His fist was engulfed in powerful flames. Having fired a magic projectile, the main character froze in one position. Falling to the floor, Sylvia watched the huge cloud of smoke that arose after using Theodore's technique. Looking at the place of the fight, Sylvia noted that Small Force and even Inferno were successful. Hugging the main character, she was surprised that in such a short time he figured out how it all worked. Theodore noted that all this was only thanks to her instructions. Smiling, he said that the spell was no longer a problem for him, adding that if they had continued for even 10 more seconds, he would not have been able to cope. Smiling, Sylvia noted that one way or another, success is success, Theodore praised. Taken aback, thanking Sylvia, Theodore said that all this was thanks to her. Indignant, Mithra called out to the main character. Frightened, Theodore tried to find out what happened. With a confused expression on her face, Mithra tried to pronounce the word guest. Taken aback, the main character tried to find out if she wanted to tell the guest. Standing behind the guys, the unknown person wondered if Theodore was in this place. Smiling, he said that he had come to accompany him to an audience with the king, asking him to go with him. Looking at the embarrassed protagonist, he stated that the ambassador of Elfheim was waiting for him. Streams of sunlight enveloped the walls of the palace. Paying attention to Kurt ascending the throne, one of his subordinates announced that the king had arrived. Leaning on the arms of the throne, Kurt stated that, first of all, he wanted to thank everyone for responding to such a sudden invitation. Veronica's face was shrouded in surprise. Kurt noted that, as they all already understand, no one could have expected such a situation. Looking at the man, whose face was hidden by a mask, he believed that it would be better if they understood that this was the most important turning point in the history of the country, noting that some should already be aware of what happened from the rumors, adding that there are those who know nothing. Having lowered his gaze, the guy who had a bandage on his face was lost in his thoughts. Seated on the throne, Kurt stated that they were gathered here because the ambassador of Elfheim had arrived, and for the first time, the reason for his arrival was to conclude friendly relations, and not for the sake of trade. With a smile on his face, Kurt asked to greet the ambassador, noting that this is why he called them all here. The country of the elves is Elfheim. The silhouette of an elf was visible in the darkness of the night. They didn't build walls against the whole world. They easily accepted the rapidly growing human civilization and even exported their national dishes to the people. However, for a very long time, they always refused to conclude any friendly relations. Leaning towards one of those present, the man in the red hat wondered if they were serious about friendship, noting that if this was all true, then it could change the entire North, not believing that Elfheim would make the first move. Leaning towards Kurt, his subordinate announced the arrival of the Elfheim ambassador. Turning his gaze in her direction, Kurt asked to let him in. After which, the doors of the meeting room opened. Afterwards, a white cloak was visible, on which the glare of the sun's rays was reflected. With a slight smile on his face, Edwin adjusted the cuff on his sleeve. Delighted, Veronica said that it was the spiritual guardian himself, the keeper of the spirits, noting that they had sent a big shot. The main character tried to find out who the guard was. Looking at the ambassador walking towards Kurt, Veronica said that this is what they call elf summoners who are capable of summoning high-ranking spirits, noting that among them there are also those who are able to grow as warriors and be awarded such a title. Looking at Edwin again, Veronica stated that in other words, this was a master. Surprised in his thoughts, Theodore reported who was equal in strength to the sword master and the magicians of the seventh circle. Kneeling before Kurt, the ambassador announced that he was Edwin from the Beach tribe, the third tribe of Elfheim, asking forgiveness for his manners. Smiling, Kurt also apologized for his ignorance of the customs of Elfheim, adding that they were warmly welcomed to Melter. While sitting on the throne, Kurt noted that although Elfheim were neighbors, for them they were always a nation that was far from them, reporting that their nation had always denied people any relations other than trade, saying that they had always respected this ideology. Putting his hand to his chin, Kurt said that they could not stop wondering why their dear neighbor had come such a long way before them. Closing his eyes, Edwin noted that he should tell him everything. Smiling, he said that they simply wanted to pay tribute to Alienar's savior, adding that they were here because their family wanted to invite him, as well as his entourage, to Elfheim as state guests. From what he heard, the main character was shocked. His face was filled with surprise at the ambassador's words. Lowering his head, Edwin said that he should make his intentions known. Smiling, he revealed that they wanted to repay Lady Alienar's savior and invite him to Elfheim as an honored guest, noting that this was his father's order. The guys were shocked by what they heard. The protagonist's face was shrouded in doubt and anxiety. Wary in his thoughts, Kurt noted that he expected that they would want to increase the volume of goods they trade, surprised by the offer. With a serious expression on his face, turning to Evidon, Kurt wondered if he wanted to say that he wanted to see the diplomatic delegation. Smiling, Edwin said that it was so. Tilting his head, Kurt tried to find out if the meeting would take place, as always, at the borders of the Great Forest. Opening his eyes slightly, Edwin declared that this was not so, saying that they behave completely differently with benefactors. With a smile on his face, Edwin said that the people of Elfheim agreed to meet Theodore and his group at the World Tree. Looking at Edwin's kneeling form, Kurt wondered if this meant they would welcome humans into the heart of the Elven lands. Having reported that this was so, Edwin noted that this would take place near the leader's tree. After which, Kurt asked how far a person could walk. Grinning, Edwin replied that the smaller the better, adding that if someone attacked again, then a small group would be much easier to defend. Tilting his head, Kurt said it was worth considering. Closing his eyes, Edwin noted that in addition, they should know something, saying that the closer to the center of the forest, speaking of the World Tree, the faster the concentration of mana will increase, saying that it was for this reason that the group should consist of only magicians or not lower than the fifth circle. Putting his hand to his chin, Kurt noted that this was a bit of a hassle, saying that there wouldn't be that many candidates. A monster was visible behind the elf, its paws pointed in his direction. Not everyone can become a participant in this mission. You must not only be a magician, but also have diplomatic skills. During the convoy incident, almost everyone who might have approached met their death. Turning his attention to Veronica, Kurt noted that in this case, the few remaining, telling about her people and herself. Horrified, Edwin asked Kurt to think twice before including Veronica in the delegation. Taken aback, Kurt stated that he knew that he would not approve of her candidacy, adding that the fire magic of the Lady of the Scarlet Tower was too strong, noting that they did not want to burn down their sacred place. Outraged, Veronica wondered if Kurt would continue to trust her only with worthless missions. At that moment, Theodore begged her to calm down. Turning his head to Kurt, Anton noted that if the decision was not pleasant, asking why not contact the Lord of the Azure Tower. With a worried expression on his face, Kurt said that he would do so, revealing that Blundell was currently busy preventing floods in the east, adding that he had no time for other missions. Raising his hand, Anton offered to take the senior magicians of different towers there. Kurt suggested that many of them were now unable to take it upon themselves, adding that those who were free were too old for such long trips. Approaching the throne, the Lord of the Pearl Tower noted that if no one else was found, then he would go. Paying attention to him, Kurt thought that he was one of the magicians who most often took on various assignments, noting that the Lord of the Pearl Tower was known for his composure. Kurt thought that sending him on this diplomatic mission would be the best idea possible. Looking at the Lord of the Tower, who put his hat to his chest. Kurt, agreeing, stated that from now on Orta becomes the first member of the delegation, adding that now he must form a group of magicians of the 5th circle and above.